let's talk a little bit about the freshmen. So some impact freshmen that I think can step in and make an impact. Um, Couple of them that I've talked about at length before are River Peppers and Zay Robinson. I really, really particularly excited about Zay Robinson. I think he's got a ton to offer. Just we got to see if he can stay healthy, see what he looks like. But gosh, River Peppers is a guy that I think if he were not buried behind two, apparently Doak Walker Award watch list candidates, if he were not buried behind them, I think he would be a candidate to be a starter this year. If it were just him and Dylan Lee battling for carries this year, I would almost guess the River Peppers would probably get the lion's share at some point in the season because he's just a really, really good player. But he's just buried behind somebody. So I'm kind of curious to see how they're going to get him the ball, especially if you can get him the ball in space. Maybe it could be a split backfield situation, or if Iowa State can get ahead, get a little bit of a lead against South Dakota. I really like how that could possibly shake out. Maybe he can get some carries there. Dylan Lee will get some carries. Maybe he can get River some carries too. Zay Robinson, talked about before. He had some injury problems in high school. He's an electric player. Um, he's quick. He's dynamic. He's elusive. He's got good top end speed. If you can get him the ball in space, he can do a lot of fun things with it. He can, if you can run him on jet sweeps. You can get him in bubble screens. You can send him deep and see what happens type of thing. You could put him on returns. Kind of a classic small gadget guy that you can move around and put in a lot of different places. Just we got to see what he looks like as far as his health. And it certainly could be that he's just not ready to go early in the season, and they just by the time he's ready to go, we're halfway through. We're 3/4 of the way into the season, and he's just not up to speed yet. That's certainly possible, but I think he's a really interesting name that if he is healthy and ready to go, I think can make a lot of noise. I do not believe Alex Mansky will play at all this year. I think put it this way, you really should hope that Alex Mansky does not play this year. Doesn't take a single snap. Connor Moberly should be getting all of the garbage time snaps. Alex Mansky should just be continuing his recovery from elbow surgery and continuing to learn the offense. And, ideally, we do not see one single snap of Alex Mansky this season. On the defense, there's not a ton. A couple redshirt freshmen. Like I said, Quentin Taylor is a redshirt freshman. There, I think is a really interesting player. Will Hawthorne at linebacker. I think he's going to be buried, but you might see him on special teams, possibly. At least get his redshirt games in. But it's kind of hard to say. Then you've got Cooper Alexander as a redshirt freshman getting it. We talked about him a little earlier. The good thing though is that Iowa State is in a position as a football program where you don't need to have Iowa State genuinely does not need any of these true freshmen to play. There is not a single true freshman on this roster that you're like, okay, this person needs to pan out or this is going to be a position of weakness this year, because the floor for the middle of this roster is so good that the floor is very high for Iowa State this season. And when your floor is so high, you're not really that worried about having freshmen step up to try to fill a certain gap or fill a certain role. You're fine if River Peppers doesn't play a snap this season or only plays, in his redshirt games, gets a few snaps in his redshirt games type of thing. You're fine with that. You don't need Zay Robinson to play. You don't need, you don't need Will Hawthorne to play. You don't need any of these. You don't need Cool to play on the offensive line. You don't need any of those people. All of these guys can redshirt and you're good to go. Now, if any of them are good enough, if any of these freshmen are good enough to play early, that should be very enticing to you. because the middle of the roster is so good. And if they're able to, if the freshman is able to punch through all the depth in the middle of that roster at basically every position, if they're able to punch through that depth and play, that should be a big deal. That should be a holy shit, this guy might be really good type of thing. Dixer says, seriously, so many analysts are just harping on the fact that Rocco will not have his two main receivers and just completely forgetting that Iowa State has the highest amount of production returning. I made this point on Twitter earlier. I think it was 10-12 put out the prompt as like, what is your opinion that you're shouting from the rooftops, basically? And my opinion was that offseason analysis has gotten very, very lazy to the point where it seems to me as though analysts have just chosen to not bother scouting Iowa State because their entire preview is they lost two NFL receivers. Guess they're going to be mid. Like they're going to be just okay. You know, that's not a scouting part. That's not a preview. You got lazy. They may have dug one level deeper and said, well, they brought in Chase Soul and Xavier Townsend to replace them, but we'll see how good they are type of things. Like, well, Chase Soul was a very highly coveted receiver in the portal, very highly regarded, and is a almost perfect one-to-one fill for Jaden Higgins in terms of athleticism and size and the play style skill set. And Xavier Townsend's almost a one-to-one plug and play for Jalen Knoll. They found two of the exact same receivers, and nobody's talking about that. And everyone's like, well, the defense was kind of weird last year. Defense was kind of bad. It's like, well, yeah, they were completely snake bitten by injuries in a way that I don't know anybody has seen in a long time. And now they've got everybody back with all of that starting experience. So like analysts, especially national analysts, are focusing on Arizona State. They're focusing on, I don't know, for some reason they're focusing on Utah for some goddamn reason. And they're focusing on Baylor and stuff like that too, Sawyer Robertson. And everybody's all hyped up about Josh Hoover and TCU. Are we just going to forget that Iowa State won 10 games, made the Big 12 title game last year with a scout team defense that they basically played a scout team defense or a scout team front six, front seven, from the middle of October on, because there were so many injuries. I mean, if you look at the Kansas game that, in Kansas City that went bad, neither Dominic Orange nor J.R. Singleton played. Like the defense, the front six or front seven was so snake bitten by injuries that they were playing with basically like actual legitimate scout team players. Rylan Barnes and Bo Goodwin should not have seen the field last year based on, the depth chart at the beginning of the season, but they did. They started multiple games. They started half the season. So you have all of that factored in. You had one safety who was so banged up that he was told to medically redshirt before the season because he had no shoulders left. Malik Verdon basically played the Big 12 championship game in a bionic arm because he was so messed up. We know Cooper Ebel, who did play as a linebacker this whole time, was also banged up. It seemed like the corner position was basically the only position that didn't deal with like a bunch of injuries. And yet that team still still won 10 games, still went to the Big 12 title game, still beat Miami in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and beat Miami in the Pop-Tarts Bowl without Jaden Higgins. I think that's and without Malik Verdon. I feel like that's notable, and people are just forgetting. They look at the Big 12 championship game and see that it was, that Arizona State won by multiple touchdowns. It wasn't particularly close. They see that and then just forget that we were even there. Like, oh, it was just Arizona State just blew everybody out, and like, no, I mean, like, Iowa State won 10 games to get there, and they did it with half a defense. You bring everybody back on a defense that should have been pretty good, and the defense should be pretty good. And then also you bring back one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. You bring back, you add in two really interesting dynamic receivers. You have two very good running backs. You bring back a bunch of good tight ends. The offense is going to be fine. And the defense is going to be good. But apparently it just doesn't matter because they lost two receivers to the NFL. Great. In 2017, they lost Allen Lazard to the NFL, and they just replaced him with Hakeem Butler. And yeah, I mean, like they figure it out. Guys leave, and then they figure it out. you know, teams recruit new players behind them and they do something different. Is Chase Sowell going to be able to immediately game one fulfill what Jaden Higgins did, you know, last year? Probably not, because Jaden Higgins had already been in the program for a year and did his thing. Chase Sowell is coming into the program. This is gonna be his first game. If you're expecting him to just go for like 10 catches for a buck 50 like Jaden Higgins used to in his first game, yeah, I hope he does that. That'd be awesome. But like, let's be real here. I mean, like they can figure it out though. I mean, like if he can get through Kansas State, get through that first 3 games, you got then you have 3 winnable games after that. You know, you can get them up to speed. They can be fine. They've got experience at all of these positions while you work in the transfers. It blows my mind. This is why college football offseason analysis is generally just complete garbo. Unless like if like as far as like national analysis goes, now like tuned in team beat reporters and writers and whatever else that know the teams are good if they were previewing their own teams. But if you're taught or even teams within their conference, because they generally are pretty tuned in to other teams in the conference. But it like national writers previewing certain teams this year are like it's just garbage because they don't do the homework, they don't scout properly, they don't do half the homework they need to do, and they give very lazy, half-baked analysis of what's going on. And it's just very, very silly. So I don't like that. And so I think Chris was, or I think the Dukester was just right on where it just people are forgetting how good Iowa State was last year, despite having an amazing amount of injuries.